Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about these one-legged step-ups that I do with a barbell and why I'm doing them, and specifically what the point is. Now, one of the things that people will notice is that I don't use a whole lot of weight on this. It's not necessary. Now, I'll continue to get stronger at them, but I generally do these on max effort squat and deadlift days. So I've usually done some really heavy weight first. So at that point, I'm reasonably fatigued, and I use these as a metabolic fatigue or metabolic conditioning exercise to basically bring my quads up. And there's some things that they bring to the table specifically, and that's why I do them. Because some people would say, well, why couldn't someone just do a pistol squat? It's like, well, pistol squats aren't particularly good. And the reason I say that, because any one-legged exercise is going to have some balance component, right? It's unavoidable. It's completely unavoidable. But we do want to minimize that. And the pistol squat, unfortunately, balance itself becomes a bigger factor in limiting the exercise in your actual quad strength, right? And that's part of the problem. Number two is not necessarily putting the tension completely where you want it. So one of the things I want you to notice, and when you have to think about this, is going to be in the context of your overall training. It's never about what this one exercise does on its own, because no one exercise on its own is ever going to build an athlete. Okay? It's not going to happen. So if you notice, because I step up onto, right now the box is set at 20 inches, depending on which side I put it on, 20 inches. So that's a little bit higher than a standard bench. So you'll notice when I first start the exercise, I'm in a deep squat position. I'm below parallel. I'm probably in a position to where I'm 3 inches, maybe 4 inches below parallel in terms of where we would be on a squat. My knee is well above the crease in my hip. And that's where most of the weight is at. That's where the hardest tension on this exercise is. So why does that matter? Well, when you look at various squatting movements, and anything that has a component where it uses the quads, what we know is that knee angle actually affects what part of the quad is worked predominantly to some extent. Meaning we know that if you're only doing half reps, meaning your knee doesn't reach 90 degrees, the upper quad gets the brunt of the work, right? The upper half of the quad does get a lot more work. The lower quad doesn't get fully activated, those heads of the muscle, until we get to a fairly deep knee angle. So when we start thinking in terms of the barbell squat, if your quads are weak on your squat and you do a lot of other exercises, generally what part of the quad is going to be the weak link in the chain? It's going to be the lower half, right? What all the bodybuilders think of as the teardrop. That's one reason some equipped power lifters, especially ones who run really heavy knee wraps, might still squat enormous weights and maybe not have lower quads that are as big as you would expect for them. Not because size doesn't equal strength, it's that they have an external object to help them push that first 100 pounds out of that hardest part, and that's the knee wraps. And yes, guys get 80 to 100 pounds out of knee wraps today. That's just the reality of what they get. That's a long story as to why that is. I could break it down, but I don't want to break it down here. That is something I can prove, though, and I have before. Guys get 80 to 100 pounds out of modern knee wraps, and it's all due to springing you out of the bottom. So when you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense that sometimes the classic raw or even the equipped squatter maybe doesn't need as much lower quad to move really big weights, but a raw squatter does. It matters because that's what helps fire you out of the hole. What gets you moving out of the very bottom is going to be that quad and your glutes. The rest of our thigh, that whole upper thigh, upper quad, gets worked on everything else that we do, right? It gets worked on everything. Even our deadlifting and pulling and everything hits that. So what we want to do with this is to hone in on the weakest part, the smallest part, and put a lot of direct tension right there. And not only that, we're putting direct tension on it while actually, again, moving the hip and everything else. It's still a squatting movement, but that it puts a tremendous amount of tension right there. And in my case, I weigh 220, got a boot on the other foot. So even for me, 55 pounds of barbell weight up there considering, my lower leg doesn't weigh that much. My calves are big, they're not that big, and the boot will compensate for that. And you have to figure I have at least 270 pounds I'm having to squat out of the bottom and doing numerous sets of 10 reps on each leg. It's a lot. And so to put that in perspective for those who maybe don't follow my channel, don't realize I'm over a 500-pound squatter. So for me, this is now challenging for sets of 10. So this is what it does. It helps bring up that lower quad with a lot of volume. Because that's where most of the work is done. And it works a lot of other things. Now, we have the added benefit of less axial loading. Now, a lot of times when people want to do only low axial loading exercises, that's garbage. That's nonsense. Novice lifters wanting to focus on that is nonsense. Why? Well, you need that axial loading. You need big structural exercises. On the other hand, how do I train? I train to a squat or a deadlift on a max every single week, oftentimes using accommodating resistance, which means I have more weight sitting on my back at the top than I can actually squat or, in some cases, deadlift, right? Because we use chains and bands. Same thing, I do very, very high volumes of speed work with heavy lockouts, so I'm racking and unracking with a heavier weight on my back, right? So, I mean, I might do 10 sets of 3 on a speed squat that actually, when you start doing the math, I actually end up having a lot of weight up on my back at the top. Same thing with the speed pulls. And we're doing very, very large amounts of that. I get a lot of axial loading. So I need the extra quad work, and this is like many, many strong lifters on a high amount of volume of training. We need the extra quad work without all the axial loading. But we're still practicing by having a weight up on our back with this. It's fine. Especially if you throw a belt on, it becomes insignificant. Because that creates enough support structure around there with intra-abdominal pressure that it's not even going to be any axial loading. Basically, it makes it axial loading free with the light weights we're using. Purely a recovery tool and a bracing tool. So you have that to help. The other thing is that we can help with compensatory strength. Now, normally, a lot of times when people say, well, don't just dumbbells or one leg or one arm movements automatically fix imbalance. No, not automatically. You have to make sure that the weak side actually does get equal or more work. Right? And in my case, usually on my very last set of these, I do one more rep with my weak leg. Doesn't mean I do a bunch more. I simply do one more. So we get, because I'm alternating, I always lead with the weak leg, and on the very final set, I end with the weak leg. Minor thing, but it also teaches us to make sure that both legs are fairly equally strong in terms of the hypertrophy work. Because we do need to be aware of compensatory strength. Now, I will say that for people who do a lot of wide stance squatting and sumo deadlifting and stuff, that's less of an issue because you're forced to equalize the force on each side more, just by the nature of those exercises. But this is just an extra tool to help us work around it. So what we have here is the ability to do an enormous amount of workload for a weak link, both in terms of unilateral as well as even primary muscles, again, lower quad, all of that. The other upside, the amount of metabolic conditioning we get, because I've had people ask, hey, is this being done just for hypertrophy or is this being done for conditioning? It's like, well, this is being done for very specific hypertrophy to bring up my weakest link on a squat. It's going to be the lower quad, which usually when people watch me squat, it's identifiable. Again, you get over that point, people will say, well, you have massive quads. No, I have high 500-pound squatter quads, which by most standards is massive. But I don't have 600-pound squatter quads. And until I get 600-pound squatter quads, I'm going to have a 600-pound squat, right? Very simple concept. Size equals strength. So we have that, but then it also does have a metabolic conditioning component. Because if you're doing, sets of 10 on each leg, you end up doing 20 total reps where you're moving your body through space. It's a fair amount of work, right? You will be out of breath a little bit. It will test your conditioning. So it's part of your metabolic conditioning overall. It's part of it. This also would kind of be one of those movements to where done with enough volume does flow back and forth between being repetition method, right? and general physical preparedness. It still has a conditioning component. So this is one of those that does a bit of both. And that's the thing. A lot of things that we do in our training, they might be very, very specific to one goal, but it doesn't mean there isn't flow into another goal as well. So this is a good exercise for that purpose because it does both. And it helps because my speed days have a conditioning component already, right? By their very nature, it's unavoidable. Max effort days don't, and this just keeps it going, because that's one of our important legs to being a good strength athlete. It's going to be conditioning, metabolic conditioning, tons of general physical preparedness. And this is, again, a great exercise because one is hypertrophy work using the repetition method, but because, again, the alternating of it and all the movement involved, it does have a metabolic conditioning component. So it will help with your overall fitness as well. And that overall fitness is what builds our work capacity. It's what facilitates better recovery. It is a very important component to our training. So this helps do all of that. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.